One of the things that has a surprising effect on our selvages and the quality of our selvages is our warp, and the way that we wind the warp on and the amount of tension that we use when winding the warp on. So I'm going to just demonstrate for you the way that I like to wind a warp onto my rigid heddle. And I use the same principles when I'm winding a warp onto my table loom as well. So this is, as you can see, just a very narrow little warp. It's only a 30 centimeter warp. I've tied it off at the warping peg, and I've taken it off the peg and I've snipped through it. So it's just lying on the table in a straight line, and it's not under any tension at all. I've made sure that my back brake is engaged so that when I start to wind it will make a terrible noise, and I apologize for the noise, but it's part of the whole weaving process, I suppose. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my warp in a bundle, and I'm going to pull it down over the front roller of my loom. And when I do this, I use this part of my hand. This part of your hand is actually quite strong, and I use that part of my hand to provide resistance. And I'm just going to carry on winding it on. Now you can see my stick has just gone onto the roller. I'm going to wind one full rotation, and when the stick comes back up to the top, I'm going to start putting in my warp separators. There are many ways of separating your warp. I use the cardboard strips. I find them clean and convenient, and you can use them over and over again. And for a warp like this, they're more than sufficient. If you're working with a particularly difficult warp, you might like to put in a continuous separation and use something like corrugated cardboard or several sheets of newspaper or heavy-duty brown paper or something like that. But for our purposes, I find that these little cardboard separators are absolutely fantastic. So I've got my first separator now on top of my stick, and I'm going to do half a revolution, and I'm going to put my second separator in opposite that. Now, you don't have to put your separators in one on top of the other. I just do. It was the way that I learned to do it, and I've no idea why. It should be better than just putting them in randomly, or whether it makes a difference or anything. I just like to do it, and it looks neat, and that's kind of important to me. So now I'm going to put my tension on again. I'm going to wind a full revolution and let go of my warp. Now we come to something called the yank and crank, and this is really important. If you look at my warp as it's sitting on the roller, you can see that there are discrepancies in the warp. Don't worry about the build-up in these two sections, because those are very thick. I call it a ridge row. So those two little sections are naturally going to build up more than the rest of the warp. But where we have this sort of discrepancy that I've got in the bottom here, that I want to try and get rid of. So now I divide my warp just roughly into about 3 bundles. Now, if I were working on a wider loom, so on a 70 or an 80 centimeter loom, I would have many more bundles. So I don't like my bundles to be too big. I like them to be quite small. And you just roughly divide them up. And then you take your first bundle and you use your front roller as leverage and just pull down. And now you're using this part of your hand, which is also relatively strong. So you're not going to do any damage to fingers or muscles if you use that. And you just give it a really, really good pull. Your warp needs to go onto the warp roller under a considerable amount of tension. You can't just kind of roll it on and hope that everything is going to work out. It's not going to be good enough. So you want to wind it onto the roller under tension. Oops, forgot to put my separator in. So I'm going to go back a little bit, pull that back, and I'm going to put my next separator in on top of the existing one. Be generous in the number of separators that you use. The more separators that you use, the better for your warp. It really doesn't pay to try and sort of skimp on these things. So the better the separation, the better your ultimate warp tension will be. So now I'm going to take my 3 little bundles again. And the first time I did the yank and crank, I started on this side of the loom and worked towards myself. This time I'm starting close to myself and working away. So you want to alternate how you actually do the yank. And don't think that by pulling down on this front roller that you're going to do any damage here. This front roller is incredibly strong. So you can really put a lot of pressure on it, and you're going to pull it until you can feel a strong resistance. You can't feel any more stretch. I'm going to put in another separator. And I quite enjoy this part of the process because now I'm finally beginning to see the color sequence coming through in my warp, and that's rather exciting. Put my next separator in on top of the existing one. Now I'm going to hold nice and tight. You will see sometimes the warp sticks move off each other. That's not a problem at all. You can just keep going with that. Now I'm going to do the yank and crank again, this time starting further away from myself. Pull it down. And there we go. You can see how firm this is as I'm holding it to one. The next separator can go in. The following one. Now you'll notice probably that one of the things that I'm not doing is getting my fingers in and actually combing through the warp like that. That is a really, really bad habit to get into when you're making a warp. It wouldn't affect a yarn like this, but there are some yarns that will twist back onto themselves. As you put your fingers in and kind of comb the twists back, the twists will actually get far, far, far worse. So if you find that your warp is twisting up a little bit, just give it a good shake and then gently just tease all the slightly longer warp ends down, just using your thumb and your forefinger, so you're actually kind of almost stroking it. Just find my 3 little bundles again and do the crank. Separator in. So this is a relatively short warp, yeah? But if you were putting up a longer warp, you would just continue building your separators into place. Okay, I think this will probably be the last one. Now, if you take a look at the way my warp is sitting on the roller, you will see that on the side, on this side, the little selvage threads have actually fallen off the end of the roller. And that's a really, really bad thing. Now, I have in the past seen people that have wound their warps onto the roller where they actually develop like a cigar shape, where there's much more sort of body in the center of the roller, and then the ends fall off and you get this kind of skinny little bit at the end. That is going to affect your salvages enormously. So if you notice that that has happened, and I can actually just put my finger on it and I can see it's only slipped off in the last revolution, and I'm fine then to just sort of lift it back on. But if it goes back further than that, I do honestly recommend that you unwind your warp and you wind it on again. It's really quite important, because your salvages will, because they're more compacted, where they've kind of fallen off the little bundle, you'll find that when you come to tie onto the front stick, you tie them, you've got more leverage to tie them on with. And then, of course, as you carry on weaving, your salvages will get tighter and tighter and tighter, and it becomes deeply uncomfortable. So do check the way that your warp ends are winding onto your roller at regular intervals, and just make sure that everything is in a straight line. The rest of the quality of the warp I'm very happy with. It's nice and level. That means that it's gone on an even tension, and I'm ready now to start threading my holes.